Jenny. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to African Xhosa ASMR. Based on the title, this is going to be a true crime ASMR video where we will cover the case of Victor van Niekerk. For a bit of background, Victor was born on the 26th of September in 1990 in Mosina in the Limpopo province of South Africa. He had one sibling, an older brother. His father was in the South African Army and enforced strict discipline to his children with the hopes that they would become well-mannered, obedient, high achievers. However, this was not the case with Victor. He was considered black sheep of the family because he was rebellious, mischievous, and never took anything seriously. He would skip school and not do his homework, etc. Victor's parents were concerned that he wouldn't even pass his matric, but to their surprise, Victor did graduate high school despite his lack of effort. After completing his high school studies, Victor did not want to get a higher education. Instead, he wanted to make his father proud by following in his footsteps. Victor decided to join the South African Defence Force. The military values are loyalty, duty, respect, selflessness, honor, integrity, and courage. Victor's father has always strived to install these principles to his two sons and was ecstatic that Victor finally decided to come back to his senses after being a quote-unquote problem child. Tons of South African citizens apply to join the South African Army, and only about 3,000 people get accepted. Victor was one of those people who got accepted. I hear a car. Let's wait for the car. Upon joining the South African Army, Victor was all about having a good time and didn't take anything seriously once again. Victor was not responsible. While in the army, he was introduced to drugs and became heavily addicted to cocaine. As a result, he was discharged from the South African Defence Force. Victor's parents were distraught to hear about this because it was as though Victor was flushing his future down the drain. Victor was a free-spirit individual and decided to find a job which complemented his character. He then became a bartender and enjoyed the local party scene. His parents were supportive and were right beside him, providing a helping hand whenever he needed them. Victor started stealing money from his parents to sustain his drug addiction. His parents told him that he should move out and that they can no longer support him if he kept on living like this. Victor begged for their forgiveness and pleaded with them not to kick him out and promised he would stop. His parents said that this is his final chance. If he does not change and does the same thing again, they will have no choice but to cut ties with him. Victor was on a straight path again. He got a job internationally. He worked as a bartender in Dubai. When he got to Dubai, he was having the time of his life. He loved his job and interacting with different people, and everything seemed okay. Victor's parents were happy that their son finally turned over a new leaf and is doing, something with his life. Despite life giving him another opportunity, Victor went astray once again. He went back to his old ways. Now, the difference was that he was no longer on South African soil, and he did not have mommy and daddy to come rescue him when he got into trouble. After a few months, he went back to partying hard and taking substances. Things were different in Dubai than in South Africa. Substances were not easy for him to find, and they were way more expensive than what he's used to in South Africa. This made Victor frustrated, and he found other means to get temporarily high. He would then turn up to work drunk to such an extent that he was eventually fired from his bartending job. After getting fired, he returned back to South Africa. Upon his return to South Africa, on a random day, Victor ran into a man called Mr. B. Mr. B ran a drug smuggling operation and asked Victor if he wanted to work for him. Mr. B told Victor that he would be willing to take Victor on a 2 weeks all expenses paid holiday in Sao Paulo, Brazil. In exchange, Victor had to smuggle drugs in his luggage. Mr. B went on to tell Victor that he has been doing this on a weekly basis without anyone ever getting caught. So this would be easy and fast money for Victor if he agrees. Victor instantly agreed. Mr. B and Victor agreed that once the operation has been successful and upon Victor's return to South Africa, they would then pay Victor 30,000 rands. And this all took place in 2016, and around that time, 30,000 rands was approximately 2,000 US dollars. Victor then agreed. Victor was all in because he saw this as an opportunity to see the world, have fun, and, secure the bag in the process, easy, fast money. So he agreed. Imagine throwing away your entire future for 30,000 rands. Oh my goodness, I can't even. No. In September of 2016, Victor was 26 years of age. He then flew to Brazil. On the first 3 days, he went sightseeing. He saw a lot of beautiful places in Brazil. And then about 3 days later, he met up with his handler, who then told him that it would take about a few weeks or days for the substances he's going to be smuggling to arrive. So what would Victor like to have, whilst he's waiting for the substances to arrive in those few weeks he's there in Brazil? Victor said he would like to have booze, the white substances, and women. Yes, Victor was provided with booze, the white sugary substance, if you know what I mean, as well as women. His wish was a command. Victor was having the time of his life in Brazil. He would party for days upon days, 3 days straight, and go to sleep for another 3 days straight. And then when he wakes up again, the cycle would repeat itself. 2 weeks later, the substances had arrived, and it was now time for him to smuggle the substances back to South Africa. Victor was then off to South Africa with the substances in his luggage. He checked in at the airport and was able to get away with it. No one knew that he was carrying substances. Once back in the country, someone else was ordered to pick up his luggage on his behalf. Victor then got paid 30,000 rand. At some point, he even tweeted, "Great how one traveling experience can totally change your life. Truly spiritual." A few days later, after receiving his 30,000 rands, he then blew it up, all on partying. After the money has dried up, he wanted more in order to sustain his partying lifestyle. So he went back to Mr. B and asked him for more trips. Victor was living a high life. He was constantly traveling to numerous countries in the most extravagant manner. His friends and, social media followers were suspicious and asked him what he does, because some of them went to school with him, so they know that he did not continue with his studies and he was kicked out of the military, so they were just curious, what is Victor doing exactly that is making him live this extravagant lifestyle? Victor would reply and say, hospitality, working for owners of a few hotels, restaurants, and pubs over the world. I give training to their staff and also new general manager of a restaurant in Sao Paulo. His friends and followers would comment and say, wow, you are so lucky. They were all envious of Victor's lifestyle. His parents were super proud of him, and they had no idea of what Victor was really doing. In the 15th of March in 2017, well, this is the day when the cracks were starting to show and the walls were tumbling down. Victor was asked by Mr. B to take a trip to India to smuggle the substances. Victor had been to India before and would stay there for 2 weeks in order to make it look like he was on a holiday so that he couldn't raise any suspicions. So because he's been to numerous countries and to India, this was a norm for him. Okay, now when it was time for him to come back home, he would board his luggage at the international airport in Mumbai. And then the Mumbai intelligence unit noticed that Victor was nervous. His demeanor raised suspicions. So the officers walked up to him and asked Victor to follow them to a room. When he got there, the officers went through his luggage and found approximately 12 kgs worth of psychotropic drugs in Victor's luggage. They interrogated Victor and I hear a car. Let's wait for it. Oh my goodness, let's wait for it. Please. Okay, thank you. They interrogated Victor, and Victor ended up giving up the names of who he was working with. Despite him giving up the names of who he was working with, he was still sent to jail. He was charged with drug trafficking and was placed in a cell with 260 other hardcore criminals. And the cell he was placed in only had the capacity to accommodate 150 people, which means that they were all crammed in there. And he waited 6 months before becoming eligible to receive a blanket, which means every night he would sleep without a blanket for 6 months. To relieve himself, he would have to use one of the holes dug up in the middle of the cells. And whenever there were heavy rains, the holes which were dug up in the cells would overflow. So you can just imagine how the living condition was in there. To make things worse, the food was infested with bugs. He would find roaches and other insects, crawling through the food as he is trying to eat. He waited for his day in court, and he eagerly wanted to return back home. His case would get postponed every time. The other prisoners in India told him that it is a norm for a case to be postponed for at least 8 years before going to trial. Victor started to accept the fact that he might be in prison for a while. So he made friends with other inmates who explained the Indian justice system to him. He then hired a lawyer who pleaded his case with the judge. The judge agreed to release him from jail, but they kept his passport to ensure that he doesn't fly back to Mzansi. Victor was released from jail after spending 14 months inside. He had no clothes, no food, no friends, no nothing. The only belonging he had was his backpack that he had when he was checking in at the airport during the time of his arrest. He was then sent to central Mumbai by a train in the middle of a rainy season. He eventually found a shelter for street children and homeless people. He became a beggar and at times wouldn't receive enough money to buy himself food on the streets, so he would then go through dumps with the hopes of getting something to fill him up. Getting a job for him was near impossible because he had no form of identification. Employers wouldn't be willing to take that chance. Life was hard. One night he woke up with the knife on his throat and he was being asked to give up all his belongings. In this case, being his backpack and the money he had received as a beggar on the street that day. His body was full of sores and he had lost a lot of weight and felt like he couldn't go on anymore. Victor had absolutely nothing. That is when a light bulb moment popped in his head. He walked the streets of India searching for a South African embassy and begged them to help him or at least give him a cell phone so that he could make a phone call to his parents. The embassy gave him a phone so that he could call his family. And he desperately pleaded with his parents to send him at least 1,000 rands, which is about $100, so that he could put himself in a better situation. His family sympathized with him. His mom, dad, and older brother agreed to send him 1,000 rands each, which would then amount to approximately $300. With this money, Victor bought a pillow, blanket, and was able to afford a roof over his head. He spent day and night begging employers to hire him. Victor eventually got a job at a local waffle store. He then learned to speak Hindi, embraced the Indian culture. He insists that he has stopped taking substances and has been clean ever since his arrest 5 years ago. He claims that he has learned from his past mistakes and reconciled with his parents, and once his case is over, he plans on going back home and mending his relationship with his family and will try to make them proud. Nothing beats a parent's love. Both his parents were sympathetic towards him and they could see the change in him. So they hoped that this time around things would be different. Then the year the world stopped came, and this is 2020. In 2020, Victor lost both his parents. To date, Victor is still in India awaiting judgment on his case. There is no denying that substance abuse and greed has the potential to destroy lives. We saw that being manifested in Victor. Thankfully, he still got a chance to turn his life around for the better. Unfortunately, many other victims of substance abuse don't get that chance. I hope that others can use Victor's story as a learning opportunity so that they don't get to go down the same dark path. Best of luck to Victor and his sobriety. Good night.